Post number 1, September 7th, 2010. Okay guys, I need your help with this. This is not a creepypasta. It's a long read, but I feel like my safety or well-being could very well depend on this. This is video game related, specifically Majora's Mask. And this is the creepiest crap that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Having said that, I recently moved into my dorm room, starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play all of those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched in a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and a rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored of beating up level 9 CPUs. This weekend I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods about 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up every local garage sale, hoping to score on some good deals. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, F-Zero, and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when the one last house caught my attention. I still have no idea why it did, but there were no cars there, and only one table was set up with random junk on it, but something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the car, and I was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for lack of better words, displeasing. It was odd. If you had asked me to tell you why I thought it was displeasing, I couldn't really point to anything out. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there were no other people within shouting distance, I would not have even thought about approaching this man. He flashed a crooked smile at me and asked what I was looking for, and immediately I noticed that he must be blind in one of his eyes. His right eye had that glazed over look about it. I forced myself not to look at his right eye, and instead at his left eye. Trying not to offend, of course. And I asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation when he would tell me that he had no idea what a video game was. But, to my surprise, he said he had a few ones in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy, and turned around and headed back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice he was selling some interesting things on his table. Littered across it were rather peculiar paintings, various artworks that looked like ink blots that the psychiatrist might show you. Curious, because I had always wondered about these things, I don't know why, I looked through them. It was obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage sale. These weren't exactly aesthetically pleasing. As I came to the last one, for some reason, it looked almost like Majora's Mask. The same heart-shaped body, with little spikes protruding outward. I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find this game, that's what it was. but given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure now. I should have asked the man about it. I wish I would have asked the man about it. After staring at Majora's Mask-shaped ink blots, I looked up and the old man was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me, smiling at me with a twisted smile. It was somewhat familiar. I'll admit I jumped out of reflex, and I laughed nervously as he had handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was the standard gray color, except someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what a coincidence this was, and I asked him how much he wanted for it. The old man smiled at me, again with that crooked and twisted smile. It looked a little more familiar this time, but I still couldn't place it. He told me I could just have it. It had belonged to his son, and he didn't want to be reminded of him anymore. I didn't really pay attention to it then. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free. But there was something strange. I had a strange feeling as well as feeling excited. I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since this looked like a pretty shady cartridge, and there's no guarantee it would work. But then the optimist inside me interjected that maybe it was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game. That was all. I thanked the man, and the man smiled at me and wished me well, saying, "Goodbye then." At least that's what I thought he said. All the way in the car riding home, I had a nagging doubt that that man had said something else. My fears were confirmed when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine, and there was one save file named simply Ben. Goodbye, Ben. He was saying goodbye, Ben. I felt bad for the man, obviously a grandparent or a parent. And then I remembered that he said it was reminding him of his son. He had been keeping it to remind him of his son, Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file, eyeballing it. I could tell that he was pretty far in the game. He had almost all of the masks, 3 out of 4, and 3/4 remained of the bosses. I noticed that he had used the owl statue to save his game. He was on day 3, and by the Stone Tower Temple with hardly an hour left before the moon would crash. I remembered thinking that it was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game and never finished it. I made a new file named Link out of tradition and started the game, ready to relive my childhood.